without any further ado, I'm going to bring you a demonstration of Spitfire Audio's fragile string evolutions. And this is not a video that is recommending the library. I'm not telling you whether or not you should buy the library. It's just a simple video of me using this particular virtual instrument within the context of a composition. So when you're watching the video, you'll notice a few things, and I'll talk about that while I'm doing the demonstration. One is the composition is not tempo synced, so it's improvisatory in nature, and it's built around an actual real instrument performance. So you'll see how I'm using sample libraries with real instruments. There are also other sample libraries that are featured as well. I won't be talking too much about those, but I do use a combination of different sample libraries when I'm working on a project. It's not just one. And again, this is the Spitfire Audio Fragile String Evolution demo. Okay, so in this particular project, I've got fragile string evolutions on a couple of different tracks. And what I'm going to do is I am going to play the project just from the start, and we can talk about it after we hear it. Now, some of these evolutions, some of these evolutions are quite conservative in terms of how they're constructed. Let me make sure I got the microphone working here. Let's see what we got. That's better. So, a lot of these evolutions are go from being very conservative in terms of how they evolve, and you can actually set that. So there are ways in which you can set up how the string evolves. You can't specifically pick articulations that it's going to evolve to, but you can in a sense up the risk factor of where it's going to go to. And again, I'm still learning how to use it, so I'm a little bit new at it. But let's go back to the beginning. So first of all, audio 1 down here is a clarinet that I recorded, and that's, again, I use a lot of live instruments when I work. But on track 1 up here, again, not labeled, I'm very sorry, but on track 1, we have our first instance of fragile string evolutions, and the UI looks like this. And if you play, for example, very expressive. And everything is divided up into a certain cell. So, for example, if we play C down here, we play up to E, it then does switch cells at a certain point. And if you want to customize each cell, you can change the pattern of evolution. You can also, for example, change how these cells are also mixed in terms of panning. And that's kind of cool. So, for example, everything is set here, but if you want, you can move it over to the left channel. And down here, you can move these to maybe the right channel. So you have and it sounds great. I mean, these are right out of the box. There's no effects or plugins being used on these channels. It's just you're hearing it straight off the on the load, basically. So it's not something I've actually played around with a lot. Of course, you have expression and velocity. I have a Moog velocity pedal for velocity, and you can adjust dynamics with your modulation wheel or another part of your controller if you want to do that. So again, it sounds very good, and I was struck by how little premixing I needed to do. In fact, nothing, in order to just use it. And that's one thing I really do appreciate about a lot of the Spitfire products, is that they do sound really good. Now, the only, I think, downside to that is when you're working with reverberation, and it's actually here, you're using their reverb. And if you wanted to use something like Mir, for example, you take the reverb out, because I think that's reverb. Let's see what we have here for effects. So yeah, you still get a little baked in space, so it's not completely a dry signal. And depending on how you like to work with strings, that might be something you want to think about in terms of how much actual room tone do you want to have when you're working with strings before you add reverb. And again, there are other libraries that record their strings in very, very dry, almost antiseptic environments, and then you have to really build out the sound. You have to really premix them to get them to sound good. So that's something else you should think about when you're getting this particular library, is it does have a sound already affixed to it in terms of sonic qualities, I would say. So if we keep going down the list here, we have a couple of other virtual instrument libraries that I'm using, and then I brought in another instance of it down here. So this particular instance I'm not using within the context of this composition. I'm just bringing it more for demonstration purposes. So if you choose one of the more extreme evolutions, it sounds like this. You can hear all that great kind of scratchy string playing, discordant. dissonant string playing, string playing. And it really evolves into something very frenetic. So it's just a really, really cool library in terms of how it's structured. And if you're working with a lot of legato-based instrumentation where it's just lots of long notes, I find this to be a really useful library because it can add a lot more character to whatever it is that you're doing without having to necessarily arrange it in such a way. You're just using this particular library and you're letting it, basically letting it do its thing within the context of whatever composition you're doing. So this is, to me, a really interesting library. Again, I'm using it within the context of some real instrumentation, and hopefully this will help you just understand a little bit better as to how it can be used. A couple of things: the project is not on the grid, so this is played freely for the most part, and you know, it's just something, again, I really enjoyed using to help me create this particular composition. So Fragile String Evolutions, there it is. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them on the site, and have a great and safe holiday season.